Why don't we just fucking talk about the Tritone for a second? Like,
I do have a short note about the Tritone because I feel like you threw it at me, and I have a good quote, actually. It's a bit long, but it's a good quote. But I also am going to completely own the fact that I'm the non-musician in the room who's been asked to explain a piece of dense music esoterica that I genuinely don't understand. So I am going to call it Joe throws Lucas under the bus.
it's not about being a musician. It was a historical, religious, like patriarchal finger.
Which I found there's almost no historical evidence to prove the church ever.
I'm so glad you found that.
Yeah. So
that you can be the one to say, I hate to tell you guys, but I think that your apocryphal bullshit is bullshit.
I think your apocryphal bullshit, as it turns out, is bullshit.
This is a bad time to mention that I've been listening to the most recent series of Last Podcast on the Left.
About Anton LaVey,
where it's like, is it all really his fault? I feel like they're going to tell me when it's over because I'm like 30 minutes into the last episode, all of it. Like, it's just him.
Yeah, man, I know a shocking amount about Anton LaVey, which probably doesn't surprise you in the slightest.
Not at all. Did you buy an ordainment in the Satanic Church, Lucas?
No, I did not.
Why not? It's all here, Lucas.
Yeah, money well spent.
Money on Bandcamp. This episode of Discography Discussion was recorded on June 20th, 2026. Ion Dissonance. And if you play dead because you know I will play along, then you are ready for this episode of Discography Discussion. I am Joe. That is Lucas. I think it's time we give the audience what they came for. We've talked about bands we wanted to talk about. Let's talk about a band they want us to talk about. Let's talk about something that's extreme and heavy and dissonant. It's in the name of the band. And do we have time signatures for you? We have time signatures tonight, and none of them are in 4. Unless you count long enough, eventually it all lines up. We'll get into that shortly. How are you doing this wonderful day, Lucas?
I am doing great, though admittedly, the last few weeks of my life have been a little less melodic than I tend towards, which is hilarious because I am the guy who suggested Author and Punisher be the episode that I show up on initially. Listen, I know I'm a hypocrite, and I'm okay with that in this case.
And yet, your hypocrisy has found its edge. We are staring off into the void. And this is where you say no?
It's not that I'm saying no. It's more that I'm saying, do I have to? Listen, is this the edge? Is this the place where I draw a hard line in the sand? No. I've listened to much harder, much uglier things than Ion Dissonance, but not often, not typically willingly, and more often than not, if I'm going to go for something that is on the fringe, let's say, it's going to be on the fringe in a way that's smothering and not bludgeoning, if that makes any sense. If I'm going to listen to something that's outside of the melodic mainstream, it tends towards atmosphere. It tends to be more slow. This is neither of those things, actually. In fact, somehow Joe managed to find the one band that is almost entirely outside of my wheelhouse.
I would not have gone in the direction of mathcore if I thought that was the goal.
You're also talking to a person who has a almost visceral aversion to doing math in his day-to-day life. So
yeah, you make a really good point with that. We should have done something like Listener, where it was primarily spoken word, and then you could have analyzed the vocals in real time, like, well, that's a very interesting paragraph he just came up with. No, this is nothing but paragraphs, and to give a little bit of my history with all things, I don't want to call it just mathcore, but that's what the internet wants me to call it. This is what? It's mathy, it's doom, it's death, it's extreme. You know, I've made fun of bands that sound like this many times on this show and in my day-to-day life, and it's not out of hatred, it's definitely out of love, because there is a point where, yes, I just want to get fucking brutal and kick the doors down and blow the walls off the building and throw all of my 200 pounds at my neighbor, and we're both here for it. That's what I want to do. There's going to be some crazy moshing going on, but I think this comes from the era where people started really swinging their arms and legs around. And I don't get it to this day. I really don't. But you know what? You do your hardcore dancing if that's what you want to do. Just be kind to your neighbor. Nobody's here to get punched in the face. Not like that.
And the funny thing is with this sort of issue for me is like having listened to the entire discography of Ion Dissonance over the course of several weeks. One of the things that I've come to is that I recognize that there is an insane amount of talent that is required to make this kind of music. There is an insane level of not just understanding in a scholastic sense, but understanding in a musculature sense, understanding it in your nervous system. A lot of the esoterica of music and of rock and roll. And I get how much talent it takes to do that. But talent doesn't always mean good. And that's a real struggling point for me because I admire the outer edges of everything, right? Well, what's that famous Robert Heinlein quote that a sufficiently advanced technology will look like magic? This is one of those places where sufficiently advanced magic looks like technology. I don't fully understand how it is they're making these sounds. I don't fully understand the whole mathcore thing. So it almost sounds mechanical to me, even though it's way too organic to be mechanical. So what I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen, is that I am wildly unprepared for these episodes. So strap in, I guess.
How it feels to be me.
Fair enough.
Well, before Lucas finds out what it really feels like to be me, I'm going to take this time to say thank you to everyone for listening to this podcast. Thank you for listening and for subscribing. If you are not a subscriber, you can find all things Discography Discussion at discussmetal.com. We are on Spotify, YouTube Music, podcasts galore, whatever your podcast player of choice, you can find us, and we appreciate you. We appreciate that you're listening. If you could do me a solid favor, find that spot on your phone where you can give us a thumbs up or a 5-star review. It really helps us out. It lets us know you're listening, and now Lucas is going to tell us how things are in the terrifying world of the Fright Lab, sir. We have Nosferatu coming out soon, right?
That we do. So, as many of you are probably already aware, I am the primary host and creator of The Fright Lab, a podcast where we discuss horror and horror media through the lens of how it impacts and intersects with real life, be that literary theory, psychology, history, and so much more. So if you like your movies spooky, and you like hearing a mostly smart and hopefully entertaining conversation about the show, you should tune in to The Fright Lab. We're available on all major podcast catchers, and we can be found at thefrightlab.com.
So, Lucas, I know you say you're not prepared, but if you would kindly...
Okay.
Tell me what you know about this band called Ion Dissonance.
So here's what I understand about Ion Dissonance. Ion Dissonance is a multi-year project of Quebecois hardcore and mathcore musicians who have been inconsistently putting out albums since, 2003? They are, I don't want to say the front line of a particular sound, but they are, I think, iconic for a lot of reasons in terms of the specificity of subgenre. I, again, do not fully understand mathcore. I am, again, probably the worst person you could have had for this episode, but I also happen to be a long-term fan of the outer edges of music. So when I listen to things like Ion Dissonance, I think, if you want the strangeness of grindcore, the sort of ballisticness of just straight-up hardcore, or you like the atonal edges of black metal, Ion Dissonance might be the band that scratches that itch for you.
I have spent many years of my life listening to, dissecting, and trying to find appreciation for all things progressive. Progressive rock, progressive metal, things that are deliberately not radio-friendly rock and roll.
Sure.
When I got to mathcore, when I got to hardcore and grindcore and all things that take the volume and the intensity of the emotion and pushes it to the limit while systematically requiring the talent and the ability to keep up with the rest of your band, but not having any patience or empathy for traditional songwriting themes, I got stuck.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something that I really struggled with. This is that fans of Discography Discussion who listen to our episode about Author and Punisher know that I like the edges of music. I like that outer point where stuff is becoming so singular and so focused on a single thing that it is willing to eschew certain things like song structure, or it's willing to throw out melody in favor of a particular approach. And that's one thing that Ion Dissonance does that I think is, I don't want to say it's good because I don't know that they're good in a classical sense, right? Trying to talk about Ion Dissonance in the same way you discuss Van Halen, let's say. Undeniably, I think everyone listening to this show would argue that Van Halen, everybody involved in that band was extremely technically gifted. Everyone involved in Ion Dissonance is extremely technically gifted, but they have taken that technicality and pushed it to a place that kind of gets away from that. I hate to say it, but in a way, Ion Dissonance reminds me of free jazz. I am not a traditional jazz fan. It's not that I think it's bad. It's that I don't know much about it. And every conversation I've attempted to have with jazz musicians, and I've met a few, has led me down a road that tells me one of two things. Either they are talking at a level of technicality and understanding of principle that is so above mine that they're not able to easily enough reach a common listener. When it comes to certain things, jazz being one of them, I feel like I'm very much a naive layman. I don't know anything about it. So either they're talking at such a level that I just don't get at what they're getting at, or they are 100% full of shit, and they're absolutely blowing smoke up my ass in an attempt to keep jazz at some transcendent level that a mere mortal can't reach. And when I hear people try to talk about free jazz, that's kind of how I feel. It's like, okay, I get that there's a lot happening here that I don't understand, but you're not also going to convince me that all of this is intentional. Not planned, because I understand that jazz is not about planning. What's the old saying? Jazz is not about the notes you play, it's about the notes you don't play. And that's fine. I understand that. Fans of other shows I'm involved with know I'm a fan of like deconstruction methods of talking about media or talking about philosophy in general. Deconstruction is very valuable. But there is a point where I'm going like, no, you guys really are just fucking around. And I say this as someone who accidentally purchased a Mike Patton free jazz album. For those of you who are fans of Faith No More, Phantomas, Peeping Tom, Lovage, Mr. Bungle, you might be thinking, Mike Patton did a free jazz album? Well, Mike Patton did a whole album of Italian pop from the 60s, so that's probably not the weirdest thing you can think of. But a Mike Patton free jazz album sounds exactly like what you would fucking think it sounds like, and it is not for everyone.
Doesn't sound like Ion Dissonance at all, I'm sure.
But in a way, it kind of does. Maybe not in the direct sense of instrumentation, but in the spirit of Ion Dissonance.
I'm certain we're going to come back to some themes of musicality throughout this episode because it's the nature of this type of music. Who's in charge? And when I try to dissect and again find the value, find the joy in this style of music, you can't just focus on the progressive qualities, right? Because what is progressive? Progressive is everything that's normal, but maybe just a little more complicated that a 4/4 drummer can't follow it. Just the same, something like this, when I listen to a band like Ion Dissonance and many bands that either came from this directly or it was just that time and everybody was just putting together the same pieces of the same recipe to create this style of randomness. From my perspective, playing guitar, playing drums, having been in many bands and am still in many bands, I ask myself, who wrote this? I don't know if the guitarist sits in the basement, lays down a bunch of ideas, slaps them together, and says, all right, guys, figure out how to count it. I used to think that was how it went. But the band is too in sync on stage that it's not just chaos. We're not listening to... I cannot say that band's name on my show. I refuse. I was going to say...
You know what? Good to know.
But I have changed my view, having spent time with Ion Dissonance specifically. I don't think it's solely the guitarist. I think about the later Tony Danza Tap Dance Extravaganza records, where it kind of became two guys putting together the music. I think it's a partnership between the primary riff writer, in the case of Ion Dissonance, I'm certain that's the guitarist, and the vocalist. And where I think audiences latch on to something like this is, yes, it's heavy. Yes, it's intense. Yes, it's dissonant and chaotic, and it doesn't sound like anything normal, right? It's creating not a wall of noise, but an emotion of noise. It is not letting you get comfortable with the beat, so you start swaying back and forth. It is, like you said a moment ago, it's trying to create that hardness. It's trying to put me on edge just a little bit, not so much that my anxiety goes through the roof, but so that I remain engaged, and it becomes move forward with as much verbosity as you possibly can, because we're going to create this insane wall of noise that to you may sound random, but then you hear all the band members in sync with each other, and you realize that somebody is following a blueprint somewhere. And maybe it's not measure by measure like it would be in other forms of heavy metal and rock and roll or even jazz. Maybe it's we're following the phrase and we're not executing one measure at a time, but we're executing sentences. It's like the musicians are in sync with the vocalist instead of the other way around.
One of the things that you brought up, you used a very specific word, and I'm glad you did, because it's something I had to chew on a bit while kind of examining this band. You brought up the word chaotic. I'm convinced that the word chaotic might be wrong. I think the word that is maybe better, and you'll have to pardon my pedantry for just a moment, but I think the word you're actually looking for is anarchic. There is a level of Ion Dissonance that sounds chaotic until you actually really listen to them for a couple of weeks and go, oh, they're actually, like you said, they're all in sync. They're aiming at something very specific. And once they all unify around a tone, typically a breakdown, you go, oh shit, I see what they were trying to do here. Like it or dislike it, you can see that it is actually a bunch of independent actors moving together towards a similar goal. It is kind of philosophically anarchic in a way, and not in a political or economic way that I use the word anarchic, but it's anarchic in the sense that you have these seemingly disconnected, disparate groups all acting in this one direction. And so chaotic, I think, would imply that it's not going anywhere, or that it's just completely random, as opposed to, no, they're all aiming at something. They all have a direction they're going towards. They're just kind of taking the scenic route to get there a little bit.
Let's not get to our final thoughts just yet. Let's start at the beginning, because that's where Ion Dissonance started. 2003, Breathing is Irrelevant. I appreciate the Borg reference. Star Trek, The Next Generation, greatest science fiction television syndicated show of all time.
I've got to level with you, man. I know this is typically the point where, especially on an episode of the Fright Lab, where I would offer some pithy counterpoint trying to diffuse, or undermine your argument. But I got to level with you. I never really watched any Star Trek at all. Like, I kind of passively absorbed a lot of Star Trek because all of my friends are Star Trek fans. And I ended up seeing a bunch of both the original cast movies as well as some of the later films. I've got to level with you. There's very little about Star Trek that has ever stuck with me, with the exception of The Trouble with Tribbles. And I don't know what that says about me as a person.
It tells me that the death of one man is a tragedy. Much like Ion Dissonance tried to tell me while listening to this first outing of, how did you describe it in the brief summary? Trying to combine hardcore and metal in a way that hadn't been done before. Something a little more intense, something a little more chaotic. I know you said anarchic was a better word, and I do agree. When I listen to Ion Dissonance, it sounds like the early stages of what the internet calls mathcore. I generally don't like that word. I know what it means, but there's so much of it that it's better described, to me at least, as hardcore, as metalcore. But when I think of metalcore, even that has multiple definitions. Is it metalcore like Haste the Day, or is it metalcore like any other band from the early 2000s that had screaming and riffs? I don't think so. I think this is just brutal. And that's the goal. It's like hardcore punk. I'm not trying to make you dance. I'm not trying to tell you that London is calling. What I want is the next 2 minutes of your energy just exploded out into the room around you.
So right around this time, 2003, there were a lot of bands that came around, and as I was listening to Ion Dissonance, it was reminding me of a lot of those bands. Specifically, the two that came to mind for me were Daughters and Circle Takes the Square. Daughters is maybe a little better known for good and bad reasons, and I find very few people know anything about Circle Takes the Square, and it's a real shame because they're so interesting and so weird. But when I look up descriptions of those bands, the things that I find is people describing Circle Takes the Square as screamo. And I gotta level with you, man. Like, when I listen to Circle Takes or Ion Dissonance, there's no way in hell I would describe them as screamo. They just don't fit that for me. But it gets into this thing about subgenre, right? Because you brought up metalcore. When someone says, Lucas, name a metalcore band, the first band that comes to mind for me is Funeral for a Friend. Undeniably metalcore. Maybe early metalcore, maybe of a very particular generation of metalcore. But that's the first band that comes to mind for me. Subgenre is a tricky fucking thing. I've always said that genre is a helpful guidepost. You know, if you're talking about film, you can say, The Raid Redemption is a action film and a martial arts film. Both are totally fair descriptors. If you like action and or martial arts films, you'll probably like The Raid Redemption. Okay, cool. But when we start getting into, The Raid Redemption is a Southeast Asian martial arts action and police drama film. Okay, hold on. Who is this for? And that's one of the problems I kept coming to when I was listening to this band. Who is Ion Dissonance for? What is the fan base of Ion Dissonance? Well, I would suspect it's probably a heavy crossover of fans of Daughters and or Circle Takes the Square. But then I stopped and thought, who's the fan base for Circle Takes the Square? Well, I can tell you, in St. Louis, it was me and my ex-roommate, and that was about it. It really wasn't a big scene, let's say. So that is one of the things I get to, especially in the early 2000s. The music world was starting to fracture, I think, in a big way. Napster and illicit downloading really started tearing the music world up in a way because it suddenly became that record labels no longer had the hegemony. They were no longer in control of the music scene. And then early streaming and early internet just forum culture and the prevalence of those kind of first bedroom producers, quote unquote, really fucking changed the music world, because all of a sudden it didn't have to be, I have to go to LA, I have to score a contract, I have to play 1,000 gigs in terrible LA bars, and maybe, just maybe, I'll get a 3-album contract. It all of a sudden became a group of people saying, fuck you, we're going to stay in Quebec, much like Ion Dissonance did, and created their own sound, their own scene, and their own approach. It just so happens that their own sound, scene, and approach ended up sounding and looking like and approaching very similar things that were happening around the world. There was something in the air in the early 2000s. I feel like maybe something happened at the end of 2001 that fucked up the world. I don't know what that could have been. But I feel like that has something to do with where the music world went. And the thing that I'll say about this album especially, even though I kind of struggle with this album for a variety of reasons, it is really, really defined. Like, they came up with a blueprint and they fucking stuck to it. They absolutely stuck to their guns on this album. And in many ways, this album specifically sets down everything you're going to hear from them going forward. And I while on one hand, I feel like that could be very boring in some regards, this band is not boring on even their worst tracks. So as much as I find this band admittedly very frustrating and honestly kind of a slog to listen to, this album is actually really impressive in its sheer brutality. Now, admittedly, I think the mix of this album is, in a word, ass.
Have you listened to this band recorded and distributed by Tooth and Nail? And I don't mean this band literally. I mean this style of music distributed by Tooth and Nail at the same time. I'm just saying it could be worse, my friend, if all you're focusing on is how it sounds.
My former roommate, who was the only other Circle Takes the Square fan. Hi, Nathan. How you doing, buddy?
Dan would be very upset that you're not including him in that.
Yeah, well,
this is about when he discovered Zayo and the whole Pennsylvania scene of extreme hardcore, metalcore, etc.
Zayo is... I don't know how many times I've heard you talk about Zayo. I'm going to go ahead and let the audience throw their tomatoes at me. I've never listened to Zayo. I don't know anything about them.
Lucas is sorry. He didn't mean it.
I don't say this very lightly. I don't like cribbing words from other people, but your boos mean nothing to me. I've seen what makes you applaud. So,
I will make sure that Lucas has to listen to Zayo at least a little bit.
At some point, I'm sure.
It's going to happen.
But yeah, the production on this sucks. And as my ex-roommate used to say about a particular record, the production on it dries my skin. It is just that flat. But that having been said, it's also a first album in 2003. I am not exactly expecting technical masterpiece here.
I appreciate this music when it is this raw. As the discography moves forward, the band will start to show signs of the times at those times. And one of the main reasons I brought up progressive metal at the beginning of this episode, or progressive music in general, it's because there is a theme amongst progressive music that became more mathy and it became more dissonant, but then it would become melodic. Between the Buried in Me comes to mind, The Contortionist. I don't dislike this record, but it's like listening to the first Tony Danza tap dance extravaganza. These guys know what they're doing. And what they're doing is trying to be as random as possible for all the reasons we've been talking about. It's not about making you dance and making you happy and making you feel something. It's about, no, we're just going to be extreme, as brutally heavy as possible. And when we're all done, we're all going to go take a shower and think about what we did to ourselves.
I will say there is a standout track on this album, Binary Part 2. There's this incredibly weird, subdued first section of the song that falls into this weird breakbeat thing that I adore. But there it is. I don't know what the fuck they were doing right here, but it was such a relief, especially basically at the end of the album, to take a deep breath, get this little section before it drops back into the noise again. I really admire that. It was a weird creative decision, and I feel like that whole era of musicians, that early 2000s screamo, mathcore, whatever thing that was happening, where they made a lot of very strange, and now we're going to put in a weird electronic thing right here that we're going to let breathe for like 6 or 7 measures, and then we're going to just slam back into you with it. You going back to Circle Takes the Square, the song Same Shade as Concrete, absolutely that there's that weird electronic break at the end. This album does the same thing. And I don't know. I appreciate that. Even though, again, kind of a fucking slog to listen to, I appreciate what they were after with that.
I really appreciate your free jazz explanation at the beginning of this episode, because I used to think that these were just a collection of riffs thrown in a bucket, and whatever order they come out in is what the song sounds like. I have a completely different appreciation for this type of dissonant hardcore because, again, they're in sync with each other. So either they know what's happening and I'm missing something, because I can't be the only correct one in the room when there's 500 or 1,000 people going ballistic with this.
Yeah.
In 2005, Ion Dissonance releases their second record, Solace. I don't have all the details, but for whatever reason, that is very difficult to find. So difficult that they remastered and re-released it in 2023. That was apparently a huge deal for Ion Dissonance fans, and that's the version I have access to. That's what I listened to this week. And to once again bring up the Tony Danza Tap Dance Extravaganza, tip your bartender, don't tread on me. That's what I hear when this thing cranks up, is the first time I heard Danza 2, the Electric Boogaloo, after the initial comedic skit, it was the loudest, most intense onslaught of decibels that I have ever heard in my life. It was not the dynamics at the time, it was the moment. It was the brutalness and all these other words that I can say to try to convey to you what it feels like the first time somebody just slams a low A flat across your face and does not let up for the next 45 minutes.
I mean, yeah, this album it's like getting hit with a piece of rebar over and over and over again.
Rebar, this is a tree trunk. First question, how are you lifting that? Second of all, how are you swinging it? Third, why is it hitting my face over and over and over again?
What I'm learning here, Joe, is that of the two humans in this office, only one of them has been hit with rebar.
Fair enough.
But the thing that I'll say about this album, like you brought out that this album is just a smack in the face right out the gate. It never stops. And it's one of the things that, even though, again, I don't, my feelings about all of this is very mixed, I've got to give these guys a lot of fucking credit, because this album is intense. It's not, it's faster than the previous album. I gotta say, I think the remastering process, I never found the original, but the remastering process, it's much crisper, it's much cleaner, and not clean in a clean musical sense, but just in a production sense. I find it much easier to listen to in a physical sense than the first album. This album beats the shit out of you. And like, so there's a track on here, She's Strychnine. I hear some stuff that it was clear that they were actually trying some different things. This is not the most repetitious thing they did. They threw in a lot of blast beats. There's the vocal screaming is much more, I think, sonically interesting. There's a lot of kind of more traditional hardcore breakdowns that kind of show up throughout it. I really, really appreciate that. And even in some cases, in the case of like She's Strychnine, I actually really, really liked. By the end of this album, though, even with all of those improvements made, it feels very repetitive. And I don't know if that's a feature of mathcore or just a feature of this band, the use of repetition. It almost sounds like some of the parts of like straight electronic DJing that I really don't like, is that it is so repetitive. And like, I get it. In the case of a lot of dance music, you know, being danceable involves being repetitious on some level. I don't know anyone could dance to Solace. I'm pretty sure no one should, actually. But I will say that they made leaps forward on this album that I really appreciate them doing. I feel like they could have been stuck in dumb, tough guy hardcore and didn't do that.
I don't know if they changed the recipe or if the recipe changed around them. I'm certain that they contributed to it in one way or another. But as we go through this discography, and Solace is no exception, the shift from seeming randomness of dissonance and extreme brutality being the primary focus of the record and the melody being the minor focus, they're going to start to change places, as it were.
Yeah.
And there are things in Ion Dissonance that I enjoyed hearing because I had heard them so many other places throughout the discography of other extreme heavy bands.
Yeah.
Bands that would do things like the early Between the Buried and Me, where it felt random, but then it wasn't just a little piece of melody here or there. It was what they call adult progressive contemporary or something like that, where...
What the fuck does that mean?
It means Between the Buried and Me. Just listen to it. You're welcome. Hearing more of the groove coming into this music, it's a better balance for me. Yes, it's album number 2. Yes, they've had more time to work on it. And yes, we are being given some gifts here with the remastering of this release. I wonder what it would have sounded like before in its original format, because if I had heard this in 2005, it would have not sounded so clean and crisp. I'm actually a little concerned that maybe this was sanitized for the remastering process, but I'm not going to complain. It's a solid fucking record, and if what you're here for is more of that heavy, brutal shit, but just a little bit better, I'm going to use the word better in this context because it is better. It's not so random. It's not so thin and chaotic. It's a little more focused on the theme, and it follows some things. I hate comparing it to Hatebreed, but that thing that Hatebreed did on the radio where it was always the same volume of the vocals, and then the music was there, and they were backing me up, and I never sing, never ever. A record like Solace feels one step away from that.
Yeah.
And it makes me think that they didn't do that, not because they were avoiding the radio, but because that wasn't the mission. That wasn't the goal. We're not trying to get on the radio. We're trying to be your favorite band and my favorite band, and you come to our shows and you buy our shirts. And no, it doesn't fucking matter if I'm not on your favorite radio station. That wasn't the goal here.
Sure. And in a way, this album, in this very kind of like parallel, lateral way, kind of reminds me of Fear Factory. And Fear Factory was way more focused on groove and melody than these guys ever were at any point in their discography. But the thing that I'll give these guys credit for is that they are doing something, especially with Solace, that they are so focused on rhythm. It's not always the most coherent rhythm. It's not always the most obvious rhythm, but they're so clearly focused on using rhythm to build intensity, more so than guitar technicality, I think. I admit, I think the bass guitar is completely missing in the mix here. If you told me they had none at all, like most modern metal, I'd go, yeah, probably.
Such a common problem in this genre, by the way.
It really fucking is.
Don't even get me started on 8 and 9 strings. You just want the bass player to go home, right?
I'm gonna talk about 8 and 9 strings later. Just you wait. But no, it is one of those things where I will say this is a definite technical step forward for them. Is it a creative step forward? I think that's up to you, and I think people who are more familiar with the genre are going to be better suited to answer that question than me. What I will give them a lot of credit for, though, is clearly they were doing something different, and I kind of wonder, hearing this mix, hearing how this album sounds by comparison to other things in their genre or in their discography, I think if they came out in 2016 versus 2003 with better production available to them, I think Breathing is Irrelevant would have been a much, much more interesting for me album.
2007, minus The Herd.
What a fucking slog this album is.
You did not enjoy this, did you?
No, I don't say this lightly. I hated this fucking album. Wall to wall, I hated this fucking album.
This was the first time it started to sound like the genre that would follow it.
Okay, all right.
I heard so many bands that sound like this.
Yeah.
Not in 2007, but from that time frame forward until about 2015, 2016. There was this moment where everybody stopped trying to be another progressive heavy band and just started being gent all the time.
I'm sorry, what did they try being?
Gent. I'm not doing it this time, Lucas.
I was wondering if I could get you to walk into that again, but apparently not.
Not this time, sir.
You've really broken away from the herd. You might say it's Joe minus the herd. I'll be here all week. Tip your waitress. I'm not proud.
So many bands, this was the mix, right? It was the dissonance, the hardcore, the metalcore, but we slow down a little bit. We start adding a little bit more melody in. This is what I'm expecting when I listen to a band like Between the Buried and Me at that time. Dissonance, brutality, heaviness. The drummer's probably going to blast for a while. There might even be some strange time signatures that I need to count if I want to keep up. But eventually they're just going to stop, and it's going to be melodic for a few minutes, and there might even be some serious Zen moments in the middle of this record. That's what the production is telling me, and that's what the mix of dissonance with melody on top of it is telling me. I'm getting those cues, but they don't come through. Not so much, but it's more than the last record. Remember what I said about we're starting to change places. Thankfully, We're never going to go full melodic, but for a band that put the word in their name that is the primary riff in the discography is just how many dissonant notes can you put together in how many different formats. They're going to stick to that. It's never going to stop. It's just got a little more melody this time.
Yeah, and here's where my complimentary stuff for them kind of falls apart. Because as much as I appreciated the single-minded focus thing, in our episode on Author and Punisher, I talked a lot about how much I love that Tristan Schoen is always seemingly aiming at one fucking thing. These guys are kind of doing the same thing. I just think it's way less interesting over time. I think if they had, I'm not saying, they should be more melodic, man. I'd like that more. That's none of my business. I'm not in the band. I'm not a musician. But what I will say is that I feel like they're clearly capable of more variation. They're clearly capable of so many interesting musical elements, and instead they opted to just return to chugga chugga ding ding, chugga chugga ding ding, chugga chugga ding ding. Great, man. Cool. Can you do literally anything else?
I think it was said about Metallica and their songwriting that the majority of Metallica riffs are all on the lower third of the guitar neck. And by lower third, I don't mean the lower third, meaning 33%. I mean frets 3, 2, 1, and 0.
Yeah.
And while that might be true, it's a funny joke. The joke gets funnier when you start talking about this style of dissonant hardcore, metalcore, and even gent. We have fewer notes, actually. For any bands in 2026 that are getting a lot of credit for being microtonal, we have fewer notes than anybody else because we just use the lower 2, 1, and 0.
Well, it's also a problem of being a trope codifier, right? Like, so much of post-punk sounds the way it does because of the bass playing in early albums from Joy Division, right? And that comes from a bass player not knowing how to play bass guitar and relying on the upper register of the guitar or the bass guitar more than its low end, right? And while for them, for Joy Division, it sounds very different than everything else that was happening at the time, it went on to make bands that sound like kind of pale imitations of Joy Division. And as a result, in this sort of thing, the insistence upon the Ion Dissonance formula 3 albums in, I think it just kind of, it becomes instead of that intensity ramping you up and amping you up and bringing you up to this fever pitch, it just becomes kind of dulling after a while. It's the problem with any predictable rhythm. It's predictable.
It's not about melody. It's about tension and release.
Yeah.
That's why it is so repetitive. And when I think about who's in charge, I think it started from the vocalist. When you scream like this, when this is what you're trying to convey to the guy in the back of the room at the CBGBs with the shitty PA, no judgment, it was just one of the themes, right? You're breathing in and you're screaming out. So there's an inhale and an exhale. And I think that is the main definition of what mathcore like this is. Yes, we are not sticking to any semblance of a 4/4 formula.
Sure.
What we are doing is breathe in, breathe out, scream. Breathe in, breathe out, scream. It doesn't sustain me, but I'm not the primary audience for this. I enjoy it. I did enjoy listening to these records. But this all day, all the time, I'm going to have to listen to something else eventually, guys. I enjoy it. I'm surprised that you didn't enjoy this record as much as the previous.
I enjoyed some of their later stuff more, which is probably not surprising at this point. The question I'm going to come back to is the question I asked at the beginning of the episode. Who's the audience here? Who is Ion Dissonance for? And increasingly, the answer becomes more and more arcane. I don't find that I understand the pursuit, because if you're looking for intense music, sure, this absolutely falls into that category. But there are so many other flavors of metal, so many other flavors of music broadly that are hitting a fever pitch of intensity that are way more sonically interesting than this. And of course, everything is a matter of opinion. Everything is up to the individual, and you should never let some rando on the internet tell you what you should or shouldn't enjoy. But I keep coming back to the question here again, who is this for? And the short answer is, I really don't know. You know, I always tell people when they kind of get into me, and like, this comes mostly from friends of mine, and I think to a lesser extent you, Joe, like, people go like, I can't make heads or tails out of your music tastes. I can't make heads or tails out of your artistic taste. One of the common themes I get is, oh, Lucas likes the thing no one has ever heard of. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. No, I do enjoy a lot of that music. I do enjoy a lot of that outsider art or more extreme ends of a medium. But you have to remember that my earliest musical memories are like the Beatles, ELO, and Jethro Tull. You know, the stuff that that is most buried in my DNA is so much more musical in a traditional sense than anything that you're hearing on this episode. But it's because I love those tradition codifiers, those things that create rock and roll. Because I love those things so much, it's helped me to grow to appreciate the more extreme, weird edges of stuff. But that said, I still don't understand what this is trying to achieve and who is trying to achieve it. Who is the audience for this genre, you know?
Outside of just be loud and crazy intense, right?
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
It's succeeding at that, and I'm in some of the same boat with you. While I enjoy listening to it, it's not my primary listen.
Yeah.
And again, looking for the joy. I hear the jazz in it because of how non-traditional it is. I hear the punk in it because of how anti-pop that it is.
Yeah.
I can't make my recurring pun about the vocals because, yes, I can hear and understand the words sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah.
It's not just they're not saying anything and expecting me to read the paragraph off the page. At this point in the discography, yeah, I'm glad that I listened to it, and I'm going to keep listening to it. I'd probably go back to Solace if this is all I got. But this is not all that we received.
Indeed.
2010, Cursed. How much more like the genre can a band sound? I think Cursed is it. I think that's where, put the flag in the sand, boys. We've been working on this for 15 to 20 years, and Cursed is what you got. If you want to know what mathcore, hardcore, metalcore, all of it sounds like, listen to Ion Dissonance in 2010, because everybody's either stealing it or we're all doing the same thing together. I don't know whose fault it is anymore, but this is actually a pretty serious time in music production, like you said, where we have a lot of bedroom producers who are all reading the same forum posts and buying the same gear and trying to replicate the same sound. So for as anti-pop as we're trying to be, we really are just trying to stick to the formula. But I don't hate this record.
No, I don't hate this record either. Whereas the last album I described moments ago as a fucking slog, I found this to be a way more interesting album. In my notes, my opening note about this is 8-string guitars and clean vocals. Oh boy.
We have become progressive dissonance.
I like this album more on a production level to start. Like, I find the way this album is mixed sounds better to me. It is it's much more of the same. It is, you know what you're fucking getting into at this point, and if you are shocked or appalled by this, that's on you. The thing that I'll say about it though is that they were doing more interesting stuff. Even if I find it a little dull or bland by the end of the album, I honestly feel like this album became more predictable than their other albums, which is on one hand really nice because it gives you a more comfortable sense within the songs, but it also is very repetitious, which, as I said before, kind of gets old. One of the comments I have in here comes from my ex-roommate years ago talking about being involved in the, I want to say it was Richmond, Virginia hardcore scene, kind of adjacent to that scene. The joke that he and his friends used to say when they got stuck at hardcore shows was, "Oh shit, here comes another breakdown." Like that really is just a lot of this here is they're just They're going to make a lot of noise. They're going to make a lot of screaming, microtonal, tritone-ass guitars. And then they're going to aim you at a breakdown. And then there'll be more screeching guitars. Lads, friends, we get it. we fucking
That's not
get it.
going to stop them, sir. That's not going to stop them or any of their peers. And 2010 might be the time frame I was the most frustrated with this type of music, because if you ever listen to something and said it just sounds the same, what you're really saying to a fan is, I'm not interested. So when I listen to this, I am interested because I'm trying to dissect it. I'm trying to replicate in my mind the thinking that lets me technically replicate this on an instrument. And I just can't do it. As much as I have tried, and I still try sometimes, I think it's interesting. But Animals as leaders, right? One of the more famous bands that sounds a lot like this.
Yeah.
CAFO, what in my brain is called CAFO, and if that's not how you're supposed to say it, sorry, I don't care. How does he play that?
I can tell you. He just wires like 3 more guitar strings on and hopes to God that fills in the gap.
That's one way. The other way is a lot of open guitar tuning.
Yeah.
Devin Townsend talks about how when he was a kid and first learning how to play the guitar, he tried to replicate Fool in the Rain, which is just an open C chord on the guitar with a high E. The rest of the strings are C and G. If you have never played guitar or a stringed instrument and you don't know, the sounds that sound appealing to you, the intervals that sound the most like rock and roll or punk, is a fifth. It's the power chord with an octave on top of it. When you tune the entire guitar to the same intervals, it becomes very easy to go fast. I'm not saying it makes it so anyone can do it, but when I hear things like Ion Dissonance or Animals as leaders, that's part of it. They are finding a way to make it easier to be that fast, to be that dissonant, to create those intervals that are not pleasant to the traditional ear, but are appealing to that jazz musician that you talked about earlier.
Yeah.
That person that's looking for tension and release, because that's what jazz is about. It's about tension and release. It's what this music is about, only this music is not just doing it with the notes. It's doing it with the time signature and the construction of the song.
Yeah.
We're using the vocals, as this band has been doing for the entire discography, as part of the percussion section. We're not singing the notes, we're screaming the notes. I'm finding more and more to like about this band and this genre as time goes on, but it took a lot more time for me. Cursed, though it's not my favorite Ion Dissonance record, it might be the best album so far.
I think that's fair. Of their discography, I think Cursed might be the best of the bunch. I feel in a way like the audience is already hearing it in my voice. I feel like that's kind of a low bar, actually. But I will say that it is the most clearly developed, and it is the most clearly thought out, and it shows the most evolution, which, I mean, this album came out in, 2010, you said?
Correct.
So from 2003 to 2010, I feel like it's actually some pretty interesting stylistic evolution. Like, they actually made some progress with this that I don't know how well other artists might have done. And there's a song on here, No Care Ever, that I think is super duper fun. And it shows that they could actually write really more interesting music than what they ended up doing. So I don't know if No Care Ever was, I don't know, a stylistic outlier. Was it their kind of vague masturbatory hand wave at a pop sensibility, or what were they doing with this track? I don't know.
Wow, we keep getting compared to bands that aren't as brutal as us. You know what we're going to do? We're going to write a song that sounds like them, only it's better, and then we can give everybody a virtual, or I guess when you're playing guitar, it's a literal middle finger. It depends on the chord. Trust me, it's fun sometimes. That could be. I don't know. But it is an outside of Ion Dissonance moment in 2010 where they've always had melody in there, but they have not emphasized it. They've increased emphasis over time, but when you listen to Ion Dissonance, you are getting dissonant, ear-piercing trash. And I don't mean trash in a negative sense. I mean just throw the bucket down the stairs and watch the shit rattle onto the floor.
Yeah.
And that's what you want. There's someone in here, in No Care Ever, that's just checking to see if they need to turn left.
But that's the thing, right? It is one of those things that makes me appreciate a band even more. I'm in this very weird position by this point in their discography. I don't particularly like their music, but I admire the hell out of it. It's a very weird thing. It's almost the way you feel about a consistent rival in your life. Not an enemy, not someone you hate, but a rival, someone you have a competitive feeling towards. You can dislike them as a person, but still admire the hell out of what they do and give them a lot of credit. Personally, I don't know that I'm ever going to listen to Ion Dissonance willingly ever again after listening to this episode when it comes out. Chances are that'll be the last time they show up in my feed or my mix. But I'll give them their due. They have been pursuing some singular vision, even if I don't see the vision, with just absolute dogged tenacity. And by the time you reach Cursed, it's fully formed, man. It is truly its own animal.
I can't say at this point there's one record I would avoid beyond all reasonable doubt. But anytime you're talking about mathcore with me, it's every once in a while. It's not never. It's, today I need that before I go listen to some Miles Davis, or like when Lucas arrived at my house today, disco.
We were listening to Teddy Pendergrass when I walked in the door.
Oh, yeah.
And that is
the
not
real soul, man.
That's not me. There's no hatred in my voice for that. Let's just put it that way.
I needed a break from Ion Dissonance.
Listen, you said there's no album in this genre or in this style that you would tell someone to avoid. And that's a fucking lie, because the album is Minus the Herd from Ion Dissonance in 2007.
Get out of my house. In 2016, Ion Dissonance decided to cast the first stone. So I sent Lucas a text and said, we're talking about Ion Dissonance on this episode. And before he had a chance to respond and say, oh, fuck no, I said, I think it'd be really interesting if you explained the tritone and why everybody's afraid of it. Because I know what I thought it was, and I know what a lot of people think it is. And there are bands that have made reputations out of the tritone. Why is everybody so afraid of this anti-interval thing, Lucas?
Well, we're going to call this section of the episode Joe Throws Lucas Under the Bus. And let me explain why. Of the two humans in the studio this evening, Joe is the musician, not me. I'm a writer. I don't know anything about music theory. But what I do know is history, and a very specific subset of history. Whenever you need something dense, peculiar, or sinister explained, typically I'm the guy you gotta go to. So in this case, he says, I need you to explain the tritone. And there was a brief pause, and I said, do you mean the devil's tritone? And he more or less gave me the audio or the kind of text messaging equivalent of the jerk off motion. Yeah, man, that's what I fucking mean. So
how do those tires feel, Lucas?
Yeah.
We got to keep this bus going at least 50 miles per hour.
I'm amazed you can get this many wheels on one bus. They say they keep going round and round. So the tritone is an arrangement of notes that fall together that sound unpleasant. They sound dissonant. Most Western music, when you think about music descending from Western classical, from chamber music, from orchestral music, and mostly from Catholic liturgical music, it follows certain very particular patterns, certain particular tones. Now, if you grew up in Southeast Asia listening to, say, gamelan, you would have a very different feeling about dissonance. Certain things that to the Western ear, quote unquote, I'm very dubious of the term Western in this context, but for use, stuff that sounds very alien, very foreign, very dissonant, if you grow up in that culture, does not sound that way. The tritone is an arrangement of notes, or a sequencing of notes, or a chord that to a lot of Western ears sounds spooky or unpleasant. It kind of falls, not directly, but kind of tangentially into the world of microtonality, which is its own absolute beast of a subject that I am not at all ready to handle. But something that happens with the tritone is it gets this title,
The Devil's Tritone.
because allegedly the church, the Catholic Church, somehow illegalized the use of it. That they said it is a satanic thing and we don't do it and we'll burn you at the stake if you play this or something. And friends, I can tell you candidly that there's almost no historical evidence for that. A lot of what I have heard historically when people talk about the Devil's Tritone comes from Paganini, the famous violin virtuoso. As far as I can tell, there is almost no evidence to justify that. Now, I found this very interesting quote with regards to the tritone that I think best summarizes it. And of all places, I found it interestingly on the Fender website. So here we go. I will send this link to Joe. It should be included in the show notes if you want to read it. So here we go. It's a bit long, but like the beast, it goes by many names. Diabolus and Musica, devil in the music, the devil's interval, the tritone, the triad, and the flattened fifth. As its Latin moniker suggests, it's an evil-sounding combination of notes that's designed to create a chilling or foreboding atmosphere. The interval was given a sinister name since listeners originally found it unpleasant and surprising. Before the tritone became a common tool in rock, listeners expected artists to play chords and patterns that were pleasing to the ear. When a tone that wasn't mellifluous, such as the triad, it was inserted into a musical passage, it was unsettling because it didn't conform to listeners' expectations. Now, if fans of the show are interested in hearing some good examples of the tritone, of the Devil's Tritone, you should probably check out Black Sabbath, because quite literally their entire...
Ladies and gentlemen, the punchline of this joke. So there was a band called Black Sabbath.
Yeah.
They recorded a song called Black Sabbath
on an album called
Black Sabbath.
First of all, that song fucking rules. I love Black Sabbath off of Black Sabbath by Black Sabbath. But it is nothing but tritones over and over again. And apparently, the story goes that Tony Iommi had been listening to Holst's Mars, the Bringer of War, which, if you've never heard it, is a fucking terrifying piece of classical music.
Absolutely.
I adore that piece. He listened to it and played it for Geezer Butler and said, well, if we do this, which that is not a Tony Iommi accent, but whatever. There isn't any truth to the rumor that it's something, the church, something illegal. But there is some fact that it just sounds weird, and you can hear it everywhere from Black Sabbath to Busta Rhymes. It is quite literally all over modern music. And if you want to listen to an album that is nothing but tritones, might I recommend Cast the First Stone by Ion Dissonance. But it is one of those things that it is integral to musical history. Most people don't like hearing it, and yet, where would we be without it?
My face hurts.
This album will do that to you.
We got to album 5, Ion Dissonance, a band that stuck to the genre that I don't know that they created.
Yeah.
I don't even know that they pioneered it. I just think that they locked into a piece of it, and though they minorly shifted what they allowed us to hear come out of their creative mindsets, I'm just saying a bunch of words to say they stuck to their fucking guns.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The thing that this album does that probably doesn't surprise anybody is it really does actually bring out more traditional song structure. There is more normal heavy metal, I guess, for lack of a better term. And I think the atmosphere this album ends up creating is actually really compelling if a bit one note or a bit three note in the case of the tritone, I suppose. It is not more of the same, even though it's kind of... It is not exactly what you expect, even though it's kind of what you know you're getting into. Standout
track for me on this was Suffering, The Art of Letting Go.
For me, it was DABDA. I don't know what that acronym was supposed to mean. But I really appreciate what they were doing with this whole section of the album, kind of the midpoint, the mid-third. Oh, another tritone. The middle third of the album, I think, is really, really cool. That's the thing I'll say about this album that I think is really interesting is I don't don't know that it's great, but it is cool. Like, it's neat to see a band doing something that's just enough outside of their wheelhouse that you can still go, yeah, this is clearly fucking Ion Dissonance. But it's also more interesting to listen to, and the vocals have a very different quality than in earlier albums. I don't know that I'm going to say they're cleaner. that would be perhaps going a bit too far. But they're just more interesting. It's kind of a shame that really nothing has happened with this band since this, because I would love to see another 4 or 5 albums after this if they were kind of following a similar or just different trajectory than they were by their 3rd album.
It may be time for final thoughts on Ion Dissonance. I wish I could say we ended somewhere we didn't start. With very minor exception, the band is extremely consistent. What you hear from a production perspective is the same sonic improvements that plague the entire genre. Even though they are seeking the same goal, everybody does find a way to stand out on their own, either as a complete piece of art or by finding something that makes the song or the riff stand out to you. It's hard for me to select a single song by Ion Dissonance that I think of like I would with a band like Zayo, with a Skin Like Winter or 5 Year Winter, or even the Ballad of Buddy Bigsby, to mention some weird techno breakdown thing that Lucas likes.
You say that with such hate in your voice.
It's out of love, I assure you. But the band succeeded on their goal. What did they want to do? They wanted to combine hardcore and metal in a way that they hadn't before. And they rode that train into the fucking ground. It was brutal as hell, and I enjoyed it. I can't say never, like I mentioned before, but Ion Dissonance is a sometimes for me. It won't be only Ion Dissonance, but sometimes you just need a little cursed in your life to get through whatever hell somebody just dumped on your plate for the last 20 minutes.
I feel about Ion Dissonance the way I feel about drone footage of interesting terrain. I enjoy a good hike. I enjoy a good walk. I like being out in the open air and on my 2 feet. But the fact of the matter is, you quite literally can't take every trail. At some point, the fork happens and you have to make a choice which way you're going. The fact of the matter is, I'm probably never going to choose to actively listen to Ion Dissonance, unless, of course, like next week they come out with a new album or something. You know, something drops out of the blue. Wouldn't be the first time it's happened. I would give it a listen, but not out of fandom, but out of interest. While I don't enjoy their music on the whole, I can also admit that I think they're interesting, if nothing else, and that there is an absolute place for them in the greater canon of rock and roll. Because as much as we like to joke about blank core or whatever extraneous 7-label subgenre of music, they are, in fact, a very real and very reasonable extension of rock and roll. So, in my final breath on Ion Dissonance, are they for me? No. Do I know who they're for? Absolutely not.
But I have been to those shows, and I've seen those people.
Am I glad that they exist? Yeah. I'm glad someone is pushing the buttons they're pushing. I'm glad that someone is challenging a curmudgeon like me to go, even I've got to admit, they've got like 5 really fucking solid songs. So yeah, if this is for you, man, you have more powerful eardrums than me, because I don't get it. But I also, even though I don't get it, I totally understand loving something that I don't get.
What is your album of the week, sir?
Okay, so I've been thinking about how I listen to this, because I'm always trying to find something new and interesting, but I'm always trying to go back and do something that I really, really love. So I want to recommend a song from the past that I deeply love, but I feel like people may have lost track of. And I want to recommend a band that I feel like not enough people are listening to. So the song that I want you to go and listen to right now comes from Fishbone. The song is called Sunless Saturday. And if you're not familiar with Fishbone, they are violently rebelling against genre. Sunless Saturday is a metal song, sort of, and their band is formally ska punk, sort of, until they're not. And they were so dedicated to just pure musicality that they kind of broke down a lot of walls. If you're not familiar with Fishbone, fucking get familiar with Fishbone. They're amazing, and you are missing out. But then I wanted to offer you all something new, something different, maybe something you are not thinking about nearly as much. And that band is Pixel Grip. Pixel Grip is a band that I became familiar with when I saw them open for Health. Their most recent album, Percepticide, The Death of Reality, is one of the most interesting fucking albums I've heard in a while. It's kind of industrial. I would kind of broadly label it like, whatever modern industrial you want to call it. It's kind of rooted in like Detroit house. There's elements of house dance to it that's really, really cool, but it is super aggressive and sometimes really sad and sweet. Most of the time it is overheated and profoundly sexual and really aggressive. So if you are interested in something you could probably dance to if you were feeling real dark about the whole ordeal, might I recommend Percepticide, The Death of Reality by Pixel Grip. Standout tracks are Bet You Do, Stamina, and Reason to Stay.
Well done, sir.
I certainly try.
If Ion Dissonance is your thing and you're here for Ion Dissonance, Solace. That would be my album of the week. If what you want is some brutal concepts, but not quite so ear-shatteringly dissonant, Listener, Return to Struggleville. It all sounds pretty till that man starts speaking, and then eventually there's a baseball bat and more than one household appliance that gets abused by it. It's not for everybody, but you just spent an entire week listening to Ion Dissonance. I figured you might want a break.
I think that's as good of an end to this episode as we could ever possibly ask for. You've spent a week listening to Ion Dissonance and you need a break.
And on that note, this has been episode 288 of Discography Discussion. Thank you for listening. Subscribe to our podcast everywhere you listen to podcasts, including Spotify, YouTube Music, and Apple Podcasts. Visit discussmetal.com for all things discography discussion, and please send questions and comments to questions@discussmetal.com. If you really want to tell Lucas and I how wrong we are about this band, discord.discussmetal.com. Not even talking about mathcore or hardcore, metalcore, deathcore, whatever core bands you want to talk about that make their entire creative journey that. Wow, I heard my mistake, and I didn't stop myself.
And this ends the segment we call Joe Throws Lucas Under the Bus.
I'm making myself laugh over here.
This is going to be one of those episodes, man.
We're going to get there. It's going to get easier, actually, as it goes on.
We're done.